Hi folks, this lecture is on President George H.W. Bush. Served one term, and he wanted to create what he called, quote, a new world order. This is in reference to the result of the Persian Gulf War, the first Iraq War. This phrase was first used by President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, in reference to what he planned on the U.S. doing after World War I. Well, Bush did have some domestic issues that he had to deal with. One was a massive deficit, and that was because of the tremendous military spending during the Reagan administration. And that's really why the U.S. finally won the Cold War. We simply outstripped the Soviets' ability to keep up with us spending-wise. The Soviet Union went bankrupt. When the Soviet Union went bankrupt, all the states or the countries that they supported just broke away. Well, the military spending outstripped the tax increases. Yes, Reagan raised taxes 11 times. 8 years in office, raised taxes 11 times. So, when I run into someone who claims to be a, quote, Reagan Republican or a Reagan conservative, I ask them, so that means you support raising taxes because your hero did so 11 times. Interesting. Well, Bush made a pledge in which he said, quote, no new taxes. He actually kept his pledge. I don't believe there are any new taxes, but he certainly raised a lot of the established taxes, which is not going to sit well with the Republican base. Unemployment was also pretty high, 7.8%. There was a couple of bright spots. One, he signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is going to extend the protected classes of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So this is people with physical disabilities, people with emotional or mental health issues. It's like I said, it's an expansion of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He supported volunteerism, which I would expect someone who is a World War II veteran or any sort of military veteran to believe in volunteerism, to believe in doing something for someone besides yourself. And his program was called the Points of Light, and every day he would announce a new point of light, a new American who shined in his volunteerism. NAFTA is not passed under the Bush administration, but we begin talking about it, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Complete removal of all tariffs, taxes, and barriers in trade at that time among the big three, Canada, U.S., and Mexico. It'll be expanded over time. NAFTA was an idea as old as this country. President George Washington believed in this. Every president had supported this. Woodrow Wilson, this was one of his main reasons for entering World War I. So we're finally going to get it. The results, we'll talk about that later. Well, when presidents are in trouble domestically, they go overseas. Because, as I said before, presidents have tremendous power abroad. Well, I was in the Army from 1983 to 1990, and there was rumors floating around after the Cold War came to an end that maybe we're going to run around the world and start to dismantle these monsters that we created, these evil, brutal dictators, military dictators, who were pro-U.S. or pro-Western. They served a purpose during the Cold War. The Cold War is over with, and possibly it's dangerous to allow these people to continue, and it looked like that's where we're heading when in 1989 the U.S. invaded Panama in something called Operation Just Cause. The purpose was to arrest Manuel Noriega, the evil, brutal dictator of Panama, who was a known drug smuggler, known for selling weapons on the black market, selling weapons to the Contras and to Nicaragua. However, he was on the payroll of the CIA to stop as many drugs as possible from going from Colombia to the U.S. It's just that when he stopped the drugs, then he would sell them locally, to Central America. He's eventually going to be arrested and taken back to the United States, where he'll serve a few decades in prison. He'll be released, and then I believe he was sent to France to face new charges. The first test of President Bush's New World Order, Iraq. The U.S. created Saddam Hussein. The U.S. supported Saddam Hussein. Without the U.S. support, Saddam Hussein could have just been another, nameless dictator in the Middle East. Instead, we gave him weapons, we gave him intelligence, we gave him chemical weapons and biological weapons, conventional weapons, in their 8-year war with Iran. We also gave him food, like grain. Grain that came from the American Midwest, grain that came from American farmers, just like Richard Nixon when he opened up trade with China and sold a tremendous amount of grain to the Soviet Union. So we're going to increase our grain production to Iraq, which will keep the Midwestern American farmers happy. Well, Senator Alan Simpson and Senator Bob Dole from Kansas talks with Saddam Hussein in early 1990, to reassure him that the U.S. is a good friend. Well, shortly thereafter, Saddam Hussein had a meeting with the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, this woman named April Glaspie. You see, Iraq paid for all that equipment and intelligence and weapons it got from the U.S. during the 8-year Iran-Iraq war by getting money from Kuwait. The Iran-Iraq war was a couple things. One, it was an Arab versus Persian or versus Iranian war, and it was a Sunni versus Shia, Iran being Shia, most Arab countries being Sunni. Now, after the war came to an end, Kuwait went knocking on Saddam Hussein's door and said, it's time to start repaying the loan. And Saddam Hussein said, no, that wasn't a loan, that was a gift from one Arab Sunni country to another Arab Sunni country. You spent the money, we Iraqis spent the blood. And Kuwait said, no, that's a loan. Saddam Hussein refused to pay it back. So what Kuwait did is that they drilled underneath the border and extracted Iraqi oil. Saddam Hussein said, stop it, and the Kuwaitis said, yes, we'll stop it as soon as we get all of our money back. So Saddam Hussein has a meeting with April Glaspie, and he asks her, what would the U.S. position be if we invaded Kuwait? Now, going way back in history, Kuwait, before it was called Kuwait, which means little castle in Arabic, was part of Iraq. And when Great Britain discovered oil, they identified a local leader, a member of the Sabah family, said, would you like to be the king of a country we'll call Kuwait in exchange for us having the oil? And the Sabah family said, sure. So Kuwait broke away from Iraq, and for a long time there had been discussions, especially in the 30s and 40s, with Kuwait rejoining Iraq. That disappeared after World War II. So Saddam Hussein tells April Glaspie one of the reasons that we go into Kuwait is to bring them back into the Iraqi fold. And April Glaspie tells Saddam Hussein in the late spring of 1990, the U.S. takes no position on Arab versus Arab matters. In other words, she just gave Saddam Hussein the green light to invade. Well, before the invasion happens, the Arab League gets together and tries to negotiate a settlement between the Kuwaitis and the Iraqis, and the Kuwaiti representative to the Arab League just publicly lambastes the Iraqis, just verbally abuses them and insults them and humiliates them. So Saddam Hussein said, that's it. And Iraq invades Kuwait. Now, President Bush was shocked that this could happen. One really good thing about this is that President Bush brought together a coalition of forces that consisted of dozens and dozens and dozens of countries who had fought against each other, countries who were enemies of the United States, joining the United States in this first test of the post-Cold War era. So once again, this looked like the U.S. was creating this new world order, this alliance of massive, massive, massive countries. Syria joined us. London, France. Even the Japanese had to change their constitution so they could send in medical ships. Well, the air phase was called Operation Desert Shield. I believe that lasted about 4 weeks, and then Operation Desert Storm was the invasion. We had some U.S. troops going south from Saudi Arabia into Kuwait to push the Iraqi army north, and we had some U.S. troops also coming from Saudi Arabia to catch them in like a pincher move. U.S. troops had almost encircled Saddam Hussein and his bestest soldiers when President Bush ordered the military to withdraw and allow Saddam Hussein and his elite fighting force to retreat to Baghdad. Well, later Bush would say the reason he did this is because the UN resolution that resulted in this massive coalition to invade Kuwait to push the Iraqis out did not include the capture of Saddam Hussein. That the UN resolution was only to push the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. And so once the U.S. did that, the operation came to a halt. Well, in 1991, President Bush's approval rate was 92%. That's really, really good. That's an A in an academic setting. A year later, January of 1992, his approval rate had fallen to 40%, one of the lowest ever in U.S. history, only to be eclipsed, only to become lower by his son, George W. Bush. And the reason why his popularity fell so dramatically from an A to an F minus was because of the economy. The economy went right into the toilet. Recession, inflation, unemployment rises. It's a bad time. So, Bush and his Vice President Dan Quayle, a senator from Indiana, runs for re-election in 1992. Against an ex-governor of Arkansas, a man by the name of Bill Clinton. And this was the theme of Clinton's campaign. It's the economy, stupid. Clinton's campaign manager told the Democratic volunteers who were working the phone banks all over this country, when the phone rings and you pick it up, the first thing you say is, "It's the economy, stupid." And that was the focus of Clinton's election strategy. Economy, economy, economy. Now, the world and the U.S. is far too complex to give credit or to blame one person. But ever since FDR, ever since those first 100 days, that's what we've done. Everything good happens, we congratulate the president, hence Bush's approval rating of over 90%. The Persian Gulf War was very short, very decisive, and we won. Yay! We hadn't won a war since Vietnam, we hadn't won a war since World War II. Korea was a stalemate, and we lost in Vietnam. So this was psychologically really important. And then the economy went in the toilet. So that's what Clinton focuses on. Clinton gets elected.